I'm Caitlin Dwyer, so I teach in the theology department here at Thomas More. This three-part series on the history and mission of our university. Dr. Ray Hebert, who's here, who's a professor of history, he's going to talk about our patron, St. Thomas More.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right, it's a pleasure to be talking to you about St. Thomas More. For those of you who don't know me, this is my 46th year at Thomas More, and one of my Ph.D. fields is Tudor Stuart England, so I've been interested in the man who is our patron for a long, long time. I've sent you a little bit of information to supplement what I'm going to say today, because when I talk about Thomas More in my classes, I'll spend a week or 2 weeks on him, depending on what the class is. So I'm only going to barely touch upon what he is and who he is and what he means today. His years are 1478 to 1535, so he's right in the middle of the Renaissance. And he is above all, I think, a Renaissance man, a Renaissance scholar. But there's some medieval aspects of him and there's some modern aspects of him, which is what makes him so special and I think a perfect patron for a liberal arts college. Just as a basic start, he was one of England's best lawyers, one of its fairest judges, one of his most respected scholars. He, for example, and Desiderius Erasmus, the great giant scholar of the Renaissance, were very close friends. They probably edited each other's works, whether it was Thomas More's Utopia, which is his most famous work, or Erasmus's Colloquies. In both cases, they probably shared ideas with each other. He's a brilliant author. He's written histories. He's done translations, and he finished his career, unfortunately, in the Tower of London, writing a number of theological treatises. In addition to that, he spent a good deal of his years in public service. So when you take a look at that chronology that I gave you, what you see, for example, is that he was a member of Parliament, he was the Under-Sheriff of London, he was an ambassador, he was the member of the King's Privy Council, which is the equivalent of their cabinet. He was Chancellor, Treasurer of the Exchequer, Speaker of the House of Commons, High Steward of both Oxford and Cambridge, and then eventually the Lord Chancellor, which is the highest position in the land other than the King himself. During those same years, ironically, he was a collaborator with Henry VIII in critiquing and criticizing Martin Luther. And the book that they wrote together, at least some say they wrote together, others say that Thomas More ghost wrote it for Henry, but that's a debate for another time. For that, Henry VIII was named the Defender of the Faith by the Pope. Ironically, by one of history's great ironies, Henry VIII's later decision to pursue a new wife, because his first wife didn't give him a son, and in the process of not receiving an annulment from the Pope, he made the decision, virtually alone, to remove the church in England from Rome's authority. He remarried his mistress, Anne Boleyn, who by this time was pregnant. And interestingly, Thomas More at that time never attacked the marriage, nor did he attack the establishment of Henry as the Church of England's head, but neither would he endorse them. And he resigned as Chancellor. The King's new chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, wasn't satisfied with that. Thomas More hoped that by being silent, he would be left alone, because he promised Henry VIII he would say nothing negative. But one of the most famous quotes from Thomas Cromwell is he said to Henry VIII that as one of England's most eminent subjects, Thomas More's silence is bellowing up and down Europe. So soon after that, with Thomas Cromwell helping Henry, they passed a series of acts. In other words, Henry VIII made the Parliament his partners, his collaborators, as well as the bishops. Only one bishop refused to go along with this, and that was John Fisher of Rochester. And he became and had been Thomas More's closest friend over the years. I mention that, by the way, because when you look around campus and you see the names of drives, There's Chelsea Drive, which is where Thomas More lived. There's John Fisher Drive, who is the friend and who died the same year as Thomas More did because he didn't take the oath. And then finally Renaissance Drive, which speaks for itself since it represents the era that they lived in. Well, finally, when the Act of Supremacy required an oath, Thomas More couldn't take the oath. He could not condone the break in the apostolic succession of the papacy. A trial followed in which a witness, Richard Rich, lied, committed perjury, saying that Thomas More hadn't spoken against the king and the oath. He was then quickly convicted and beheaded in 1535. In the end, though, Thomas More was not silenced. Hundreds of biographies have been written over the years. In fact, if you have an opportunity to go upstairs sometimes to the Thomas More room, we have an entire section of that room that is just books about St. Thomas More. Among all of those words written about him, probably the most famous are written by a London schoolmaster named Robert Whittington. He wrote, quote, "More is a man of angel's wit and singular learning, and as time requires, a man of marvelous mirth and pastimes, and sometime of steadfast gravity, a man for all seasons." I mention that quote because if you have the opportunity, there is a movie out there that came out in 1967, won the Academy Award for many, many things, from the leading actor to the movie of the year. And I know under good circumstances, having heard it from President Jack Murphy himself, that movie influenced him probably more than anything else in wanting to name the college Thomas More after they moved from downtown Covington out to the suburbs and needed a new name. So the new name was indeed Thomas More College in 1968, right after he had been praised by many in the movie and the play A Man for All Seasons. It was a play in London, then it was a play in New York City, and then it was finally a movie that won all of those awards. Now, I could go on for hours, but let me just end with a couple of quotes that I think represent what Thomas More stands for today. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we have a lawyer's lunch every year in February. It started in 1981, and we've had it every year since. We've brought in scholars, we've brought in judges, we've brought in various historians of different types, judges, and we invite the college's graduates who are lawyers and who are judges, of which there are many. Well, one of those that spoke back in the 90s was a man named Joseph Morris. He was a Department of Justice attorney, and his conclusion said, quote, "Thomas More is one of us, at ease in human society, the central figure in countless friendships. He was also imbued with deep private passions. He was a self-disciplined man and hard driving. If the day did not allow enough hours for his agenda of work, study, and prayer, then he sacrificed his sleep and cut short the night. Whether his client was his neighbor, his king, or his God, he was a tireless advocate and an ethical adversary. His potent mind and expansive spirit dwelt in the human body of a common man of familiar proportions. It is in this that he becomes a compelling model for us. For all his importance as a scholar and a public man, it is More's spirit which provokes our admiration and our love. He knew the world, he confronted falsehood, sorrow, suffering, and death, and yet he understood at the bottom the goodness which pervades the universe. He was always cheerful and ever happy. To the end, to this end, he served God by his wits, and even then he asked of us all, pray for me as I shall pray for thee, that we may merrily meet in heaven. I look at him, as I wrap up here, as a man of enormous intellectual curiosity, intelligence, and above all, integrity. a father, a patron of the young. He believed that his daughters should be as well educated as his sons, which was not common then. He was a model of enthusiasm and energy. As a lawyer and a judge, he displayed an upright spirit of public service worthy to be emulated. As a believer in social justice, he expressed simply a Christian ideal of human beings caring for the needs of others. As an individual, he embodied faithfulness to his own principles, even in the face of adversity and eventually persecution. In short, what is special about Thomas More is that we can and should identify with him in ways that mean the most to us today in today's terms. How to be faithful to our word, how to keep our mouths shut at the proper time, and how to follow our consciences even if it kills us.
More knowledge of our patron.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ray.